Hello everyone, this is Leo from the Monkeys Making Misplaced channel. Today we're going to be talking about some cards you might see or you might want to consider for a Luard deck. I know that there have been pretty much a well-established list, but personally as someone who's played Luard for quite a while, I don't think that's ever going to be something that should be like, this deck is just set in stone, especially with how versatile it is at getting you any grade ones. It's not just like, oh, you can only get the ritual ones or you can only get the ones that are like meta defining. This deck should always be improving. That's the reason that I personally love this deck, is that every set you can try something new, and maybe you find something that other people don't know or don't consider. And especially if you haven't seen, I'll try to post here, but there is a choice restriction already in Japan for Luard and the horse dog from the horse dog promo. So it looks like we're probably going to have to find a new place to put that promo in, or something to replace that promo in Luard, as it's not going to get to see play here. But obviously, let's just quickly go over what Luard does. So Ritual 3 means that you have to have at least 3 or more grade 1s in your drop. And then at the beginning of your ride phase, you can choose 2 normal units from your drop, put them on the bottom of your deck in any order, and until a turn, you can stride without paying the cost the next time you stride. So it allows you to cycle in units to use again, and it allows you to not have to discard to stride, which is very good, because that means you don't have to discard any cards, you don't have to lose anything. You can just get essentially free advantage, and especially because of the second ability, that's when your G unit strides, you can counterblast one, choose a rear guard and retire it, and then you search your deck for up to 2 grade 1 or less cards, call them to rear and shuffle your deck. A very key component here is that we're looking at the fact that it's not getting only ritual cards how the strides do. I don't have the strides here, but the first stride we go into only allows you to call cards with ritual. Although it's not tied to grade 1 or less, it is only ritual units, so that means that you can't get anything generic. But this Luard does allow you, which means you can get yourself 2 combo pieces, or maybe 2 one-ofs that you might think, oh, like, well, I'll never see them or something like that. Why would I play such little counts of like some bad combo? Well, it's because Luard can just get them for you, right? So let's start off with some of the grade 2 cards, just because these are just things you've probably seen. Cadwalla allows you to Soul Blast, clear your board, which is very important in the Shiranui meta. So it allows you to clear that board. You don't have many grade 1, grade 2 or greater units in the deck, besides I think Morfessa, the grade 3 Stride Dragon, and like Luard, so you'll probably never get something specific off of this, but it's still a draw card regardless of if you get a card. Then we have Drilling Angel, card you've probably seen in a lot of decks. In case you do need more soul, although there are options in the grade 1 slot for this, sometimes you might think, or in the future, there might be a need for a lot of soul with Luard, so keeping Drilling Angel in mind is always good. Then we have Kybri. Kybri is an interesting thing for me because it does cost both a Counterblast and a Soul Blast, and resources can be a little intensive in this deck, especially if you don't manage yourself correctly. But it does allow you to make a board, right? That isn't a big issue with Luard, but it is a card to remember. I mean, Kybrie's been good in things like Youthberg. It's been played in a lot of the Keter Sanctuary decks, besides Bastion, because Bastion can't really play anything that isn't grade 3 or becomes a grade 3. But Kybrie's still a card to consider here. Then the Cycler as well is something that I don't know if it would be worthwhile. It is interesting because you still have to ride up normally, right? So you could Soul Blast your ride line. Additional, you don't really use it for much anything else besides once you get to the Liafall turn. But the ability, and you can never use that second ability, so it seems like more of a drawback, but I do think that some people might want to consider it. You'll never be able to activate the second ability because you can never Persona Ride in this deck, right? Then on to Crystallized Dragon, another way to just clear your board, because when it intercepts, you can choose one of your back row rears and move it to Guardian Circle. Obviously, this means you have to get a chance to use it, right? Shiranui might force you to attack with it, but if they force you to attack with this, that means they're not forcing you to attack with maybe something a little bit better, or something that you might care a bit more about. But this just means you get to clear your board. If they force you to call something back and you have another unit and they force you to attack with the other unit, you can intercept with Crystallized Dragon and then move that other rear guard to the Guardian Circle with Crystallized Dragon, and now you've gotten rid of 2 cards and essentially forced them to only be able to retire that 1 card, right? Because you don't really care much about your units being retired or anything like that, because you can recur. They get brought back from drop, they can be put back into deck, so you're pretty fine with not having to worry about it. So Crystallized Dragon is an interesting pick in my opinion. If you see that there's a lot of Shiranui in your locals, you might want to consider it. I mean, it opens up it forces your opponent to either force you to attack with this thing so that you can't use it to clear your board entirely, or it's just some extra shield against most other matchups, right? It becomes a 5k and then whatever you intercept with it, so it'll be a 10k shield, right? Another card that you might all be very used to seeing is Daring. When it's placed on rear, if your Vanguard has only one clan, which Luard does because he's only from Shadow Paladin, you can Soul Blast one, discard a card from hand, choose a card with only the same clan as your Vanguard from drop, and put it into your hand. So the discard, although might seem a little detrimental because you're just like, well, I'm just 1-for-1ing essentially, and it costs a soul. But because you do need to have grade 1s in drop, that means that this card is just getting you something you might need. Any ritual piece, a Morfessa, maybe even a Luard that you might need to pitch for the second stride, this card can get. It being grade 2 is a little unfortunate. It means we can't really search it, so you kind of have to just hope you draw it when you need it. So that can be a little bit unfortunate. I mean, sometimes you'll really want to see this guy, but there'll be no way for you to get it because you can't search for grade 2s. You can only search for grade 1s in this deck, so you might have to up the count of it. But then if you up the count too much, you might see too many of these, and you might just get too many grade 2s in drop, and maybe not be able to accomplish the ritual you need. But it's still a good card. I would recommend like 2 in most decks. In most Luard decks, especially because you kind of do want that effect. And then another card that I haven't seen a lot of play in the decks, but could be very interesting, is Skull Witch Nain. So when she's placed on rear, if your Vanguard clan is only Shadow Paladin, which Luard is, you can counterblast 1, put a card from your hand into your soul, and draw 2 cards. So some extra draw makes a little bit of soul. It does cost a CB. CB can be a little intensive in this deck, so you'd have to be very careful there. But hey, it is a way to get some extra card draw, filter a little, or go through your deck a little bit faster. Make some soul if you need be. That first ability where if your Vanguard is Blaster, it gets +5, will never really activate. But if you can call this out on like grade 2, and then when you stride it with your Luard, you can just retire this. It means you can just open up that slot so it won't be as awful. Some extra card draw, obviously, always good. Then we have Maple. Maple's just a good card we've seen in Keter whenever your Vanguard's placed. During the right phase, if you don't have one, you just get to call one, so it means you'll always have at least one unit to attack with, even if your opponent gets rid of your entire board and entire hand, and you're only able to stride, especially with this deck being able to stride for free. Even if you don't have the cards to stride from hand, you can still stride from your ability, so you'll always be able to get that Maple back. Not much to say here, it's just a good card. Then we have Toll Pass. Toll Pass, I've been testing it in my list. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I know a lot of people really like it. So when it's placed on rear or guardian, you put a total of 2 cards from soul or drop that were into your right deck face up, and you perform either of following according to the circle it's on. So if it's on rear, you look at top 5, choose a unit card with grade less than or equal to Vanguard, call it to rear, and shuffle your deck. And then if it's not your main face, the called unit comes in at rest, and then if it's on guardian, it becomes a 20k shield. If this worked mid-combat, I'd like it a little bit more. Obviously, you probably couldn't still do much with it, but, you know, it would be a little bit more interesting way to maybe extend the attacks. But I understand that sometimes we get nerfed cards because Premium could abuse them. So this is, I think, one of those cases. So are the Order grade 2s from set 11. Those cards were nerfed because of Premium. Although Standard could probably do some crazy stuff with them, it probably wouldn't be us that would be abusing those cards. But the issue that I have with Toll Pass is that sometimes I don't want to put the stuff from my right deck back. I don't want to have to lose my Liafall, and I don't want to lose my grade 1 to lower my ritual count. Obviously, later on in the game, you'll be fine with putting the grade 1 and the grade 0 back into your right deck because you won't need them for your ritual count. You'll be pretty set. But it's just one of those things where I'd like to just get this early on. I'd like to use this on my first stride to just make myself a board without having to commit much from hand. But because I have to return cards that I might need for ritual at that point, it's a little bit rough. I think it's a good card, but maybe in this deck it's a little bit rough to use. It could be a little bit detrimental to you. You might not be able to get or you might always have to make a little bit of a sacrifice. It might end up making you play or it might force a play that you don't think is optimal, but because it's the only one you have, you might have to make it, right? So personally, Toll Pass is a good card, but I would suggest maybe trying something else in place of it, which we still have a lot of grade 1s to go. This is only the first one. Then we have Divine Sister Daquis. So when your other unit is placed by your card's ability, you can counterblast 1, draw a card. There are 2 of this effect. The rest of the ability doesn't matter because we're not playing Soul Rayron. But if you wanted some extra card draw, this would be the way to go about it. You call by card ability quite a lot in this deck, so you can just be able to have some recurable card draw. Although cards that just sit on the board aren't as great, with things like Chernui and Gandiva pretty much still being in the metagame. A lot of it's higher, a lot of removal. But if we move away from that sort of meta, these cards can come into the deck and give you access to way more card draw than you might already have. Then we have another card that I've seen play in a lot of decks, or a lot of the Luard decks, is Periris. So when your Vanguard is attacked, if it's the 5th battle of this turn or more, you bind this unit, choose one of your units, and it cannot be hit until in the battle. So you play this again, or this is very good against things like Gantiva to block out their last attack, because at most they'll have 5 attacks. Shiranui as well will have 5 attacks pretty consistently, so you can at least get one of those to get removed. Obviously, they might force you to attack your Vanguard with this, but it is a 6k base, so even with their abilities, it probably won't get the highest power boost. But it is able to just protect you in some of the, I mean, we've seen things like Greedon Mask be able to put out a lot of attacks. We have Magnolia Mask that I've seen that can do a lot of attacks. So this card is pretty good, and then being able to just search it off of your Luard if maybe you're striding first, and you just kind of have to play defensively because you don't have the aggro, or your opponent's not at high enough damage for you to win the game that turn. You might just use its ability to call 2 of these from your deck and just kind of have a slow rolling turn where you just kind of pepper your opponent with some damage, try to do some card advantage, get yourself some more cards in your hand, and forcing them to lose it. So this is a very good card. I understand what people play. I think the average I've seen is about 2 or 3. I don't think people are playing more than that, especially because it's just recoverable in the stack. It's a grade 1, so you can keep using it as much as you need. Moving on, we have Decorator Angel. This is a card I've seen in some list, in some of the Japanese list and in some of the English list. It just says when your other unit in the same column as this unit attacks, that unit gets +5 until the battle. This works because you can use it with Morfessa, swing with Morfessa, then call something to another column, and then you swing with your grade 3 or your Vanguard, call something in the Morfessa column, and then you get another attack, which means that it'll give that another unit another +5. So these are good cards to sit, but I think similarly to the draw card, cards that sit on the board are very bad in the current format. You don't want cards they're just going to sit there, because if they just sit there, you just give your opponent free advantage, which we don't want to see. Excuse me. It's also a 5k base, which means that it really only provides a extra 2k, because if it was just an 8k, it would the power that it gives brings it up to a total 10k boost. So if it was just an 8k, it's really only providing plus 2k boost if we try to do the math. But obviously the whole point is to use that ability to give the unit in front of it +5 at least twice, so it'll be a 15k overall power for that turn instead of the just a little bit that you would see. But it's a good card. I just don't like cards that sit on the board as much. They could be a little bit rough. You know, we have to be very wary of what cards we are putting on the board that are just going to stay there. Then obviously Painkiller Angel staple. I think most decks are playing the full set, if not at least 3. It's a perfect card for this deck. It gets rid of itself, puts itself in a drop, draws you a card, sort of replaces itself. It's a grade 1. It's still an 8k, so it's just a very perfect card. There's no reason to not play almost a full set, or at least 3 of this card in your Luard deck. Following that, we have Dindrain. Dindrain is just some extra counter charging if you don't want to rely on the Owl to counter charge. It is very soul heavy, but if you play some of the other soul cards to maybe increase the amount of soul you'll have, you could be a little bit more free to use Dindrain as often as you want. So Dindrain is pretty good here. You just have to be very careful, because if you don't maintain your soul correctly, sometimes you could whiff on abilities. But it's just a free counter charging on place. It's searchable with your Vanguard. You can bring it back from drop. You'll be fine. Then we have Replenishment Angel. So when it boosts a rear guard, if you have a grade 3 or greater Vanguard, standing Vanguard, you can counterblast one, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, choose up to 2 cards from among them, put them on the top of your deck in any order, and put the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. So it allows you to sort of stack your deck, right? It lets you decide, well, I do want to see these cards, or I don't want to see these cards. For a CB, and it always has to attack before Vanguard, so that's perfect. It'll allow you to set up. And then if you're in your first grade 3 turn, you can just call a Morfess into that column, and then still get to attack after it. You could use this on your second stride to maybe guarantee yourself some triggers. It's perfect. It does cost a CB, so that's where the drawback is. There's a lot of CB usage in the normal deck already, so you'd have to be very careful. But if you include, maybe increase the count of your Dindrains to offset that, you should be pretty good. Then we have a card that is actually pretty cool, is Ordelio. So whenever your grade 1 or less unit is placed on rear from deck, you can put that unit into your soul, and if you put it into soul, this unit gets +5 until end of turn. So when you call with your Luard for the first time, you could call something that you don't really want to have on board, but you do want to filter the deck of it. So you just use Ordelios, have it sitting on board, call it 2, suck them into soul, and then Ordelio becomes an 18k booster, which is pretty good. And then you would have extra soul for your other abilities, things like Din Drain to get some extra countercharging if you need to be safe. Ordelio is actually something that I think is pretty interesting. It is a card that just sits on board, and I know I've said that that's probably not the greatest, but it is pretty good. I think we could maybe have it around for a turn without having to worry too much. But you do have to be careful, right? This could just get retired, and then you'd waste your whole column or your whole turn playing this card, and it just gets to get removed. But I think that extra soul could be pretty interesting, and having an 18k booster pretty much every turn, if you keep putting the cards into soul, is pretty good. I think you get to have a really big Vanguard column, which if you include it or if you use it with the second stride, means that you get an insanely high no Sentinels Vanguard swing that can essentially guarantee a hit. Then, similar to the Divine Sister we saw earlier, we have Solda's Sakab. It's just when your rearguard is placed in the front row as the same column as this Counterblast Strong card. Same thing as the Divine Sister, you just have to be careful. They could just get retired, you could just lose this card before you even get to see the benefits of it. But it's still a good card to just draw you some extra cards. Kasi be awful, but we have to look at all the cards that could be played or could be useful. Then we have another Divine Sister in Palmier, so when she placed on rear from hand, so you can't use it from deck. That's the drawback for this card. If a Vanguard's grade 3 or greater, you can counterblast 1, look at the top 3, and then put them on the top of your deck in an order. So more stacking, but the downside of this card versus the one that is when it boosts is that it has to specifically be called from hand. It can't be called with your Luard ability, which means it's a little bit more restrictive, but hey, being able to look at top 3 is pretty good. You might consider it if you think that you want to have turns where you can guarantee some triggers on your drive checks for your second stride. So that's where I would see this being played as a way to essentially scare your opponent. If you look at the top 3 and go, wow, those are really good, and you just put them all back, your opponent's going to be very, very scared of what you have on top of there. Obviously, you have to play it off correctly, but it's still a really good card. Then we have Annie. So when this unit is retired from rear by any card's ability, if your hand has 3 or less cards, you draw a card. This is good if you're running out of cards, maybe in the earlier game. Like in your first stride, you call something like the Succubus. I don't remember what her name is. I'll try to put her on screen, but it's the one where when she's placed on rear, you can look at top 2 and call one of them, and then it's retired at the end of the turn. That would still be a card's ability, so if you had a couple cards in hand, you'd still be able to draw a card. I think this is interesting. Maybe you could use it retired with your Luard ability to just draw yourself some cards. You could even have them sitting on board, and if you can commit to guarding a lot more if you know that if your opponent even tries to retire your units, you'll get to just get some cards back. Obviously, you have to have 3 or less, so you'd have to be in a pretty bad state. But maybe after you're done guarding or something like that, it could be pretty good to have these cards just sitting there and being able to protect you, using it next turn with your Luard to retire it, because your opponent's going to be less likely to want to retire this card because they don't want to give you a draw. You could use it with your Luard, get yourself an extra card draw, which means you'll be able to get 3 cards off of your Luard instead of just 2, which I think is pretty good. Then we have just some power unit with Energy Roofable Angel. When it's placed on rear, Soul Blast 1, and this unit gets +2 until end of turn for each of your other units. You can call this off of Luard, and it becomes an incredibly large unit. If you have a full board, it gets plus 10, so it becomes an 18k booster. Obviously, we have other units that do that, but maybe you want something that can get rid of the cards in your soul. So this would be perfect. It becomes a really big column. You could put 2 of these together. You got a 36k column with one of the cards flipped up. That's 41. That's an incredibly big number. Your opponent would have to commit at least a front and a crit to essentially protect themselves from that attack. So pretty good card. It's just big power. Big power, always good. Then we have some of the more niche cards here at the end. So we have Kikich. So when it's placed on rear, choose up to 1 crate or front from your hand, reveal it, put it on the bottom of your deck, and if you put a card, you can Soul Blast 1, draw a card. So you can use these to put some triggers back into your deck. I mean, the deck is trying to do that already with the crest being able to put crits back into your deck. So this is just another way to keep doing that. And as well, you can just Soul Blast anything to draw a card. So you can Soul Blast your grade 1 from the ride line to get the ritual going a little earlier, and you just get to draw a card. Obviously, you don't even have to Soul Blast one to draw a card. You could just put the triggers back into your hand, but there'd be no reason to do that. You would just lose out on a card. I think this card can actually be pretty good because it's an on place, so you could use it as you're going into stride, call 2 of these out, return 2 crits to your deck, which means you're filling the deck with more triggers than you would have normal units, so it's perfect for that. And then you just Soul Blast to draw yourself 2 new cards. Obviously, you could just draw triggers, but this is incredible. I think the deck plays a lot of crits. Its whole purpose is to cycle through your deck to the point where you get barely any grade 1s in there and a bunch of triggers in the deck, because that's what it's trying to do. It's trying to filter as effectively as it can. And this is a card that I think is perfect for that. If you don't want to draw, you're allowed to not draw, and then if you do want to draw, you have the ability to pay a cost to draw a card. So it's just 1 for 1, but you can just call it off a deck, thin the deck, give yourself an idea of how much normal unit versus triggers are left in there, and you can make a decision based on that whether you want to draw the card or not. Maybe if you see that the deck is almost 90% triggers, there'd be no reason to use the ability to draw because you don't want to draw a trigger, right? You have the highest chance to draw triggers, so you just want to push because now you know that your deck is 90% triggers, which is insane to think, right? This is a card I am considering very much for my current deck. I just have to find some copies. Set 3 and 4 commons are a little rough for me because that was one of the few sets that I was out of the game for. So I don't have a lot of bulk, but I'm hoping to find at least 2 copies of this to play test in the deck because I think this could actually be worth trying out. Then we have Mokoko. So when it's placed on ready, you Soul Blast 1, draw a card, choose a card from your hand, and discard it. A way to cycle through your deck and get that ritual count going very quickly. So you Soul Blast your grade 1 from your right deck, you draw a card, and then you can discard another grade 1 that you don't need. So it's pretty good. With just that alone, you'd have Ritual 2 if you discard, or if you Soul Blast your grade 1 and discard a grade 1. So that's pretty good. You get 2 extra cards in your Ritual. It means you get your Ritual going pretty quick. It doesn't need to be called by a card's ability. It doesn't need to do anything. It can just be when it's placed on rear. So I think this is a pretty good card. Although there are probably better effects of this one's pretty good because although Soul Blast 1, draw, then ditch is not great normally, in something like Luard where you're trying to get those grade 1s and drop to make Ritual happen, I think this is perfect. So another card I might be considering, just because I love digging through the deck, making sure that I can thin and draw as much as I can to have my deck be as compact and as compressed as possible. So there's another card that I might be considering as well for another 2 of. We're moving on to the last 2 cards here. We have Pupurira. So at the end of the battle, your drive check reveals a trigger unit. You can counterblast 1, discard 2 cards from your hand, draw 2 cards. So you can just discard grade 1s to draw 2 cards, right? So if you need it, this can be dropped as soon as you can attack, right? It doesn't need to be at your grade 3 or anything like that. It's just when your drive check reveals a trigger unit. And it allows you to just fill your ritual count up, draw some other cards. If you're playing a lot of cards that aren't ritual, you manually need to dig for them, this would be perfect because you're just digging or you're just drawing randomly, hoping to find the cards. A little heavy, but as you've seen, we have other effects that kind of help us with that. I mean, if we up the count of soul, then we can play Dindrain a little bit more freely to countercharge more, be able to use more of these CB effects. This is an interesting card. I don't know, but I think there could be something here. You just need to try it out. And then the last card is a Sepsis Angel. So at the end of battle, this unit attack the Vanguard. You can counterblast 1, choose one of your opponent's rear guards in the same column as this unit, put that unit and this unit on the bottom of each player's deck. So some sort of removal that puts things on the bottom of the deck so they return to the deck instead of going into drop, because a lot of decks can sort of recur from drop nowadays, not just Luard. So being able to put itself back into the deck, which means that you can just bring it out next turn. The downside is that it costs a CB and that it has to attack a Vanguard. It can't have boosted, which is a little bit unfortunate. But if you use this in the earlier game, you could just kind of remove a piece from your opponent's board that they might not think you have removal for, right? The Luard deck doesn't have a lot of removal on its side. So having this be able to come out early and be like, hey, I am going to just remove your piece that you thought was safe because you didn't think this deck had removal in it. This is where a Sepsis Angel comes in clutch, right? CB1 is very cost intensive, but if you really think that removal is needed in this deck, this is one of the pieces that could be pretty good. That synergizes with your deck, because if it goes just back, if you put things back into your deck, it's perfect because you just get to call it back out with Luard, right? But with that, we are officially done with this list. As you can see, Luard is something that I take a lot of joy in deck building and testing. I don't think this deck will ever be truly solved because it uses any grade ones that it can, right? It is a toolbox deck that uses any grade ones that come out either from now until the game stops, right? That's always how I've played it. You have to test as many things as you can. You have to figure out what ratios you like, right? And then every set more grade ones come out that are generic, and that's what Luard thrives on. So I'm gonna keep updating the deck. I might not do a deck profile for this deck, especially because there's just so many out there. So I'd rather just do this and show you some cards that are pretty cool that I think you could consider playing. But with that, this has been Leo. Thank you all for watching.